Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Phil with the Movies. I'm your host, Phil Walsh, and you were listening to episode number 129 of this ongoing podcast that is always for the love of movies. Whether you are listening to this on one of your favorite podcasting apps or you're watching the show on YouTube, welcome back. And as always, thank you for your support and, most important of all, your friendship. And that goes double today because I want to just take a moment and say I am so grateful and appreciative of everyone who reached out over the last few weeks. Your kind words and sentiments really have meant the world to me, and so I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I mean it when I say I consider you all friends, whether we have met in person or whether we have just interacted over this show and our love of movies. I consider you to be a friend, and so I thank you for your support during this what has been a difficult time for me and my family. But again, your well wishes and sentiments have really helped lift my spirits and have just been so needed. So thank you for all that you have done and just for being the great and wonderful people that you are. Before I begin with today's show, I've got two films to review for you, both current, one more so than the other, but I wanted to take this opportunity at the start and sort of reset the table and outline where I see things going for the next month or so, particularly as we are heading into spooky season. My favorite time of the year, Halloween time, is right around the corner. Autumn is in the air. There's still a kind of a hangover from summer, and the humidity is still in my neck of the woods. But the leaves are changing. I'm seeing more and more pumpkins each and every day. So it's good times all around, and certainly going to be a fun month for October. And I've got a number of different shows and ideas planned. So I wanted to sort of take this opportunity now and sort of set the stage, if you will, carve the pumpkin for where I see the month of October here at Phil at the Movies. So just to sort of give a precursor, because if anyone who has listened to this show for a long time, or frankly, if you follow me on social media, you know that just at this point, it will be 2 weeks. My most anticipated film of the year, frankly, of the last few years, Joker Folie Deux, will be released on October 4th. I am seeing it October 3rd. I'm actually seeing it 3 times over the course of that weekend. So it's going to be Joker Mania starting on October 3rd and running through Sunday. But I'm, as you can imagine, ecstatic to see this film. Reviews have already started to come out, and much like the first film, it is proving to be divisive, shall we say, with the critics. But as far as I'm concerned, bring it on and send in this particular case, send in both of the clowns. But in any event, next week's show, I am going to do a retrospective on the 2019 film. I was looking back actually through the episodes, and I've interestingly only ever done a kind of a brief segment on Joker it was over 2 years ago now, and it was long before the sequel was announced. And I really wanted to take the opportunity kind of as a lead up to the film to revisit it and share my thoughts on it and discuss its impact now 5 years later almost to the date. So that will be next week's show. And then my plan is to do my review for Joker Folie Deux probably sometime in the second week of October. I figure that way let people have a chance to see it, let sort of the hype, if you will, get out there and spoilers and whatnot. So that way, when the time comes, we can do a real in-depth analysis and review of the film. Because I'm sure as I'm sitting here, I'm going to have a lot of thoughts on this film. Hopefully, all positive. But again, we will see in just a few weeks' time. Again, I am feverishly anticipating and counting down the days. As I said, anyone who is following me on social media knows that this is, bar none, my most anticipated and hyped film of the year, and quite frankly, of the last few years. But and even Joker will be here before we know it. Roll on October 4th. But starting actually at the beginning of next month, kind of really as a kickoff to spooky season, going to be doing a little bit of a crossover, if you will. I'm going to be joined by my friend and actually fellow co-host from DC Unlimited, Anthony Caruso, who is also a host of his own show, Tis the Podcast. He's sort of a Christmas-centric, holiday-themed, movie-centric podcast, and it's a great listen. I highly recommend it, particularly to kind of keep the Christmas spirit with you all year long. They do a fantastic job, even if it's not covering a Christmas movie. I mean, I'm quite amazed at how they've been able to cover sort of, the obscure Christmas specials or even forgotten films from a bygone era. But even if it's not that, they are really into the spooky season. And so we're doing sort of a crossover with Anthony and I. And it's going to be a fun time. It's going to be a fun time. We're going to be having a debate, if you will. Yeah, sort of in the spirit of this political season. We're going to be having a debate. And no, we're not going to be debating politics. That is not the prerogative here on the show. But we are going to be debating who is the ultimate final girl. Laurie Strode versus Sidney Prescott. And so it's Halloween versus Scream. It will be, no pun intended, a Scream, to be sure. Anthony will be taking the side of Sidney Prescott and making the case that she is the ultimate final girl. And no surprise, I will be taking the side of Laurie Strode and making the case that she is the ultimate final girl. And then we'll actually be joined by our buddy and friend Chris Evans, who we also co-host with on DC Unlimited, and he's going to be an impartial jury, if you will, a jury of one, and render a verdict over which argument wins the day. So that is going to be the kickoff to the spooky season. I'm really looking forward to it. Anthony and I have been, trading playful barbs back and forth online. So it's going to be a good time. There will be a very civil conversation. This will not turn into a free-for-all, and no one will be ranting or raving, as is the custom for a political season. But in any event, that will be the first start of the month and kind of a good kickoff to spooky season. But in addition to that, what I am going to do in the middle of October, in addition to the Friday shows, because looking at the calendar between sort of Joker dominating, what will at least be 1 week's worth of episodes. I mean, knowing me, it'll probably spill over into another one. But what I'm planning to do, because there is another film, We Live in Time, starring Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield, that comes out in October, and I want to do a review on that one because it's another film that I'm looking forward to this year. I figure probably in the middle of October, I'm going to do kind of a midweek reviews for Salem's Lot, which is going to be released on HBO or HBO Max. I've lost track. It's a streaming option, so hold our stomachs, because we don't know if it's going to be good or not. There may be a reason this was sent to streaming, but we shall see. Again, fingers crossed. And I'm also going to do Beetlejuice during that time. So again, just there's not enough days in the week, and so I figured kind of really make a good time out of spooky season, carve the pumpkin, if you will, and do kind of 2-for-1 shows in some instances. So October will be a stacked month, but one that I am looking forward to, and of course I'll be closing out the month with a Halloween centric episode. Again, can't get through the month of October without having a full on Halloween discussion. The final girl debate will really just be a tease, and I figure I have to at least discuss one Halloween movie in depth before the month ends. So that will be on the agenda at the end of October. So that is the stage that is set for the next month. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of different films, a lot of different storylines, but going to be a good time nevertheless. So that is what is upcoming. So again, spooky season right around the corner. But today's topics, two films. The first one is a recently released film called The Killer's Game, starring Dave Bautista. And I actually wrote a review for this online for Geek Vibe Nation, and I will leave the link in it for you in the show notes if you want to kind of read more in depth my thoughts on the film. But I wanted to cover it because it is a recently released film. It came out last Friday. And sadly, it did not go over well at the box office, and reviews have been less than stellar, so to speak. But I saw it earlier in the week. It was not a sold out showing. Probably no surprise there. But that's not necessarily a knock against the movie. To be fair, I really don't think it was well marketed. That's again my own 2 cents, because it's actually a really fun time, I must say. It is, the premise of the film involves Bautista, who I just have to say, sidebar, he is the best wrestler turned actor, period. All right, just had to get that out of the way. But he plays an assassin, and he's sort of an assassin with a heart of gold. He has a moral compass, if you will, if that's even possible for a killer for hire. But in any event, his sort of prerogative is he only goes after the, quote, bad guys, so criminals, evildoers, etc. And he's very good at his job, highly in demand, and sort of lives a very quiet, secluded, private life. And all of that changes when he meets this ballerina, Maisie, who, as you can imagine, sort of dances her way into his heart and turns his whole world upside down. And now he is looking to retire and start a life with Maisie and live happily ever after. And that's the immediate hook. And within about 10 minutes, the shoe drops, if you will, and he is given some rather tragic and unfortunate news. He has a neurological disease and is given essentially 3 months or less before he dies. And they're talking about giving him palliative measures and comfort measures, and he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to suffer. He doesn't want to put Maisie through that, and so he resolves to hold the phone, take a hit out on himself. He puts out a contract for a killer for hire to take him out to alleviate his suffering, and then in the process takes out a life insurance policy so that Maisie will be protected. Well, all seems to be going according to plan until, hold on, again, you probably are guessing where this is going. He gets a phone call from his doctor. The famous mix-up at the lab. He is not dying. He's going to be fine. Everything is perfect. Well, not everything is perfect. He has a contract hit out on him, and he can't cancel the hit. So now he has to fend off a bunch of would-be killers who are all out looking to collect the bounty on him. He's also stirred up some controversy with another sort of a hitman, hit person, organizer, if you will. And so it really turns into this sort of in some cases, a comedy of errors. And the tone of the film really shifts kind of right at that midpoint where, it starts off, it is very serious. It sort of evokes, in a lot of ways, the first Taken movie, in terms of like the tone at the beginning, because it is very serious. It's kind of very straightforward, and then it makes a shift, and I don't want to call it an outright comedy, because that in some ways is almost selling it short, but the film does get outright hilarious, and I have to tip my hat to Bautista on that, because he really finds a way to balance that line, because another actor might sort of lean into almost a campy rendition or just outright silliness. He finds that balance where it is funny and it's sort of dark humor, but yet he's able to kind of keep it 1 foot in the serious realm, because pretty much the second and third halves of the film are just him, finding creative ways to take out these would-be assassins, and it's sort of John Wick-esque if you've seen any of those films. So it's definitely high action, very very propulsive, very explosive, if you will, in terms of both the set pieces, but also even just sort of the blood and guts that are accompanying it. but in addition to it, it almost becomes kind of, by the third act, almost Home Alone-ish. There's sort of like a bunch of booby traps. It actually kind of conjures up the ending of Skyfall, which again does have those sort of like Home Alone booby trap-esque plot devices, but it is sort of just, it's kind of pedal to the metal action comedy adventure. I had a great time with this film. I think this will probably find another life once it is released onto streaming, which is, I mean, it's both good and bad. I mean, it's wonderful that films can sort of have a second life once they reach that platform, but it's also sad because, I mean, this is a film that really does play well in a theater, and again, Bautista is just perfect in it. He's funny, he's charming, he's good with the one-liners, and he carries it. He carries his film, and the characters themselves, much of them are very thinly sketched, and we don't really have a chance to sort of get to know many of them outside of Bautista, but Ben Kingsley has a small supporting role in the film. He's sort of a mentor for Bautista's character, and he's great. I mean, he sort of elevates any project that he's in, and he gives this film a nice little touch of class, and his character he's also funny. Like, again, he's very, very dry sense of humor. This is not like, slapstick, but it's sort of the absurdity of the situation, and kind of, sort of poking fun, tongue-in-cheek aspects of the sort of, hitman culture, if you will. But again, a lot of action. It is sort of John-esque in a way, and it holds your interest. It really, by the end of the film, again, this is not the best movie of the year by any means, but it delivers, and it delivers what it intends from the very beginning. They're sort of setting out to make you invested in this character, Bautista's Joe Flood. That's his name, and I think the fact that he is so likable on screen, you're with him throughout even the kind of extraordinary or out of the box type situations. But I had a great time with it. I had a big smile on my face. I was cheering at the necessary moments, and it's just a fun silly action film that actually does have a heart of gold kind of in the center of it. So I wasn't necessarily expecting that, but that's, again, I think, a testament to Dave Bautista, who finds that ability to sort of again play to the absurdity while also keeping it semi-serious. But The Killer's Game, it is playing now. Again, don't know for how long, but I would recommend seeing it in theaters, particularly if you're just looking for sort of a fun action adventure comedy. This really does sort of check all of those boxes, and I think it would play well with a crowd. So definitely would recommend this film. It was sort of a surprise for me. It wasn't, to be fair, it wasn't actually on my radar. I'd actually forgotten about it, but then I had an opportunity to write a review for it, and figured, well, let's see what it's all about, and I'm glad I did, because it was an enjoyable film, and it does what sometimes sort of the simplest premises can achieve, which is to just be an entertaining popcorn movie. And I feel like I've had a lot of those this year, and this is certainly one of them that I will look back on fondly at the end of the year. Little transition music to cue up the next segment, but I would be remiss if I did not mention the recently released 3.5-hour director's cut of Napoleon from acclaimed and renowned director, one of the best in my opinion, Ridley Scott. Napoleon was one of my favorite films of last year, and we're sort of actually kicking off the Joaquin Phoenix fan train a little earlier than expected, but bear with me. As I said, this was one of my favorite films of last year. I found it to be riveting. I found it to be totally unexpected and, frankly, tonally unexpected than my initial preconceived notions. But it was one of those films that I got it instantly, and I really liked that it inverts your expectations in a lot of ways. You sort of expect a grand, almost biblical epic tale, and certainly those elements are in the film, but it is much more about Napoleon the man, and really what a unique and frankly odd individual he was, as well as the unique dynamic of his marriage to Josephine, played by Vanessa Kirby in the film. So I wanted to take a chance and talk about the director's cut, which was released at the end of last month. And as I said, it's a 3.5 hour extension of the film, so it's nearly 50 minutes of new footage. And while it does not change necessarily the structure or even the intention of the film, the additional scenes are frankly welcomed. And as far as I'm concerned, it takes a movie that was already, in my opinion, a 5 out of 5 and kicks it up a notch. So it's one of those situations where sometimes a director's cut, for better or for worse, and in a lot of cases for worse, can almost damage an original film. And Ridley Scott is no stranger to director's cuts. He's done them to many of his films over the years, including probably the most famous cut with Blade Runner. But in any event, Napoleon gets an extension, and I have to say it's one of those situations where the movie does feel like it can breathe a little bit more. One of the things about the original version, and you don't notice this when you're watching it at first because you're just engaged in the film story, but seeing now a number of additional scenes, moments last longer. There's sort of those extra beats, and the characters and their dynamics can sort of play out a little bit longer instead of just sort of quick cuts and transitions. We are really going on what feels like a true journey, if you will, and it's not a kind of cradle to grave story, but we're really almost getting into the psyche and soul of Napoleon the man. And one of the additional aspects of this director's cut that I really have to give tremendous praise for is it really does enhance Vanessa Kirby's performance as Josephine. I mean, she's wonderful in the film, but she's not in it as much as you would think. And in many ways, her storyline is almost sort of sidelined in the original cut, and sort of in favor of just sort of telling a Napoleon-centric story with Josephine as sort of a supporting player. And she still is to an extent, but she really does feel like she has her own storyline and her own piece to this alongside the trajectory of Napoleon's life. And it really does sort of paint a much more interesting portrait of their truly bizarre marriage that ultimately fell apart. And that's, again, those elements are in the original film, but not to the extent that I was actually expecting. So this was one of those instances where he really turned this film into an already incredible one. Like I said, for me, this was a 5 out of 5. So it in theory could have only gone down with a director's cut, but this is one of those instances where it elevates it into something even grander and really turns it into. I think it's one of Scott's best films. I would put it in a top 5 category. I love this film. Joaquin Phoenix, of course, never turns in a bad performance. But even again, the director's cut really enhances his role. Again, it makes his turn shine even more. So again, this is one of those instances where it really does just sort of elevates the entire texture of what Scott was going for. And again, it's sort of worthy of mention. The film is certainly has its fans, but it also has a lot of detractors. And again, it's one of those cases where I think people went in maybe expecting something different. I think they might have been expecting something more akin to, I don't know, Gladiator, perhaps. And this film is not that. It is still it's a grand epic. It's a story covering a very mercurial and in a lot of ways, transformational and really polarizing figure. But it's much more about sort of him individually and him, kind of behind closed doors in a way. And certainly there are liberties taken with some of the historical accuracies, or perhaps there are, inaccuracies might be the better word. But it's all, I think, in favor of trying to create a very compelling portrait of a complicated man. And that is there in the original film, but it's there tenfold in this director's cut. And so I really would direct this at anyone who was maybe on the fence or didn't even like the original version. I say if you don't mind watching a 3.5 hour version, an extension, I say check this out, because this is one of those cases where I think if you didn't enjoy it, you might find something more with it, because it really does expand the canvas. And kind of looking back on that original cut, which is still magnificent, you see where things were sort of cut short or never given a chance to pan out or expand. And again, Josephine by Vanessa Kirby was certainly one of the shortcomings, kind of looking at it back in retrospect. She is there in full context in this cut, and it really does both enhance her story. Again, it's a wonderful performance by her to begin with, but it really does sort of give an extra punch to this frankly, interesting and mercurial epic that Ridley Scott was going for. And so I'm hoping that this new version will gain traction, because I think ultimately what he was going for was, it's really a character piece in a way. You almost could think of it as a one-person play, and that's sort of, maybe is sort of downplaying it, because again, there's all these other players in the film, but it really is, the spotlight is centered on Napoleon. And again, when you have an actor like Joaquin Phoenix in a role like that, I mean, you can really just let him go wild, which he does with it, but it's in ways you wouldn't expect, and there's sort of a humor to his Napoleon, and sort of an odd humor, if you will, and he's almost kind of like a little devil in a way, like he's someone like you could just see like in a schoolyard, like trying to fight the big bully, and they're pulling their hand down on his head, trying to keep him back in line, but yet he keeps going. It's really a fascinating tale, and Ridley Scott does it in a way which is only he can do it. I mean, it's just sort of, another director might have gone kind of more traditional biopic, and this, it is a biopic, but it's a loose biopic, if that makes any sense. It is more in the spirit of the man than in necessarily telling a kind of cradle to grave storyline. It's more about like, who was this guy? Who was Napoleon? And what exactly was his raison d'etre, if you will. But again, highly recommend the film from the get-go, but I really recommend you checking out the director's cut, because it is one of those cases where it is well worth your time, particularly if you were not a fan of the original film. Hats off to everyone involved, and particularly for Ridley Scott. So for everyone that thought the director's cut was never happening, it does exist. It is out there, and you can certainly check it out. I think it's available on Apple TV and maybe another. Actually, no, I think it's just Apple TV. So you will have to check it out on that platform. But in any event, I think it's worth the price of admission, because this is one of those films that, in a lot of ways, I could see it having a cult following in years to come. I mean, not that it was sort of a quote unquote box office disaster, but as I said, the reviews of it were sort of all over the place, and again, it sort of elicits, I don't want to say like, strong passions, like, oh, people are like, defending it with their life or trashing it one way or another. But, it does seem that at least in the online corridors, the thumbs down mentality for this film is fairly prevalent. So I'm hopeful that this new version will continue to maybe change hearts and minds, maybe just a little bit. But Napoleon, the director's cut, it is available now, and I highly recommend you checking out that film. And there we have it. That concludes today's episode. Hope you enjoyed the show. I, of course, will be back next week with a kickoff to Joker Folie à Deux, the retrospective of the 2019 film that is coming next week. So stay tuned on that front. But until then, everybody, be well, take care, and I'll be back next week. And we, of course, will do this all over again for the love of movies.